everyone, and welcome to today's session. We are Pre-Med CC, a student-led organization established in the fall of 2021. Our goal as an organization was to create an online community for pre-medical students at community colleges and universities with the hope of guiding the next generation of diverse and inclusive physicians.
And while we advertise our organization as being for community college students, our events are open to anyone. We realize that finding guidance and mentorship in a pre-med journey can be especially challenging for first-generation pre-med students, people that lack the financial resources, or just those that do not know people in the medical field.
One of the best parts about our events is that they are virtual, so you can do it from the comfort of your own home. We typically have events on Fridays from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. PST, and on Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. PST.
If you aren't able to attend the event, all our sessions are uploaded on our YouTube channel. Many of our sessions will end with Q&A with our speakers. Any questions that you have can be put in the Q&A section on Zoom, and our team members will read them and have them answered.
After you have attended our event, you can log on to our website and complete the quiz, which will contain questions pertaining to our session today.
If you score 70% or higher on the quiz, you'll be awarded a 2-hour mentorship certificate to show that you attended our session today.
If you want to stay connected with our upcoming events or want to tell your pre-med friends about Pre-Med CC, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok at Pre-Med CC.
Everyone, welcome. Today Trinity and I are going to be talking a little bit about the MCAT and some of the strategies that we did to score successfully on it, and just to give you guys some feedback or like some tips on what you can do to boost your score and do well. So I'm Madeleine. I am a current first-year medical student at University of Rochester in New York, and I'll let Trinity introduce herself.
I'm Trinity. I am a student at the University of Guelph. I actually wrote my last final today, so technically I'm done. My degree is over, so that's kind of fun. So starting a job next year, taking a gap year before applying to medical school this cycle.
Congrats on being done. I'm sure that's
Thank you.
nice.
Yeah, feels good.
So we have just a little presentation. Trinity, do you want to share it, or do you want me to pull it up?
I have it open, so I should be able to share it so long as it lets me do that.
Just a quick little reminder for everyone. If you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A section, and then Trinity and I will answer them after we're finished with the presentation.
All right. We already kind of introduced ourselves. I guess I can say it again. So my name's Trinity. I majored in biomedical sciences. I was also a student athlete my entire time at university, so I play basketball. So that took up a lot of my time, but I also had lots of time for other stuff. And fun fact, I guess, is that I'm Canadian. So currently just a little bit outside of Toronto.
And then I'm Madeleine. Like I was saying, I'm a first-year medical student at University of Rochester. During undergrad, I was a molecular biology major at UCLA. And then I'm also from California. I'm American. And I'm currently living in Rochester, New York, which is also pretty close to Toronto.
Do you want to take this one, or do you want me to do it?
I can do this one. So what is the MCAT? The MCAT is 4 sections. It's a very long exam. So the first section is in chemistry and physical sciences. So that's like physics, chemistry. The second, oh man, it's been a while since I took it. The second section is biology. So these are all going to be like biology-based questions, a lot of passages that you'll, and like articles that you'll read and then answer questions about biology. Oh gosh, is it CARS second, actually? I messed it up. I'm so sorry, guys. I took the MCAT about 3 years ago now, but it hasn't changed much. So it's actually CARS, which is critical analysis and reasoning skills. So you'll be presented with passages that on a lot of different topics, a lot in the humanities, and then you'll answer questions based on that. Then your third section is biology. And then your fourth section is, that's going to be like psychology and social sciences. And then the score ranges, it takes 7.5 hours to finish the exam. And the score ranges go from 472 to 528. And it's meant to be like in a bell curve of score distribution. So you don't get a score saying like you got this many questions out of this many right and get a percentage. Instead, percentages are based on where you fall within the bell curve. So the average score is about 50% of students do better than that, 50% of students do worse than that, and that's going to be 500. And then the average acceptance for medical schools usually look at people that are scoring around 511. Again, you can be a little bit below that, a little bit above that, but that's the average score for acceptances. And then, so Trinity and I both scored in the top percentages in the 97th percentile.
Yeah, as you can see, yeah, 4 sections. It's a marathon of an exam. And we'll talk about that a bit later, but like the key is building up the stamina. And yeah, and you have to wait about a month to get your score back, which is like the worst month on earth. But if you just put your head down and try to ignore it, it gets a little bit better.
So this is just a little bit about my MCAT study timeline. So both Trinity and I, you'll see, have very different timelines for how we did it. But basically, I started in 2021. I started reviewing content in the Kaplan review books. You might have seen them. They're usually come in a set of 7 books, all on different subjects. And then, so I spent about a month reviewing content, just looking through those those books, and then doing like practice questions and practice exams. And then in June, I took my first Kaplan full-length exam. So these are all through the Kaplan website, and they're not officially sponsored by the AAMC. Then in July, I actually took my first real AAMC full-length. They are the ones that are writing the exam and creating it. So the full-length exams on their website are going to be the most like representative of what you'll actually see on the exam. I did take a vacation a week before my exam, which honestly I feel like might have been a good thing, kind of put me in a good headspace. But I had been working pretty hard in the months leading up to that. Then I took my final full length right before my real exam, and I took the exam on August 7th, 2021, and then again got my scores back about a month later. So during my studying timeline, luckily I was done with classes. I ended up graduating about a quarter early. So I had a quarter where I could really focus on just studying for the MCAT, which was super helpful. And I would just treat it like it was a job. I was studying 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for that full 3 months.
So I wrote my MCAT in 2022, so roughly a year after Madeleine did. So I started content review in February of 2022. So I was doing this while taking a full course load. But I just allotted extra time where I could and was just had a goal to get through all the content by the end of my semester, which would have been end of April. So like a little under 3 months to get through content. Took me a while, but I knew that going in. So April 2022, I finished the content review. I also did a vacation, not quite in the same order that Madeleine did. But this was like right after all my final exams. I had filled my brain with all the content, all the Anki cards from all the decks, and was just trying to give myself a little bit of a breather before I jumped into practice questions. So when I got back, I did my first full length on May 6th. It was sort of just used as a diagnostic one just to see, what the questions were like, how long I could last without getting tired answering the questions, finding some bigger gaps in my knowledge. And then in May 2022 and June, I wasn't working. So I elected to work a job at a summer camp that summer where I only had to work July and August because that's how our system works in Canada. July and August is only when the elementary schools are off. So that worked out nicely. So I could, like Madeleine did, study full time, treat it like a job. I was studying every day, mostly using Anki cards and stuff like that for content review, just so things that were constantly getting reinforced to me. But mostly I was studying with practice questions. So I wasn't necessarily sitting down to do a full length every day, but I was probably doing about half of that amount to 3/4 of amount in practice questions every day, I would say. Um, to the best of my power, I tried to get a testing center that was close to my house. I was unsuccessful. I was on that website at noon the day that it opened, which is when you're supposed to be on there, and there were about 15,000 kids in front of me waiting to register. So I had to travel for my exam. I wrote it, so I had to stay at a hotel. I got there 2 nights before because I didn't want to have only one night before and have, the person next to me throwing a party and have a terrible sleep. So during those first few days, I like didn't study at all the first 3 days. I had obviously you can see that the timeline's a bit off graphically, but I took my final full length before I left for the hotel. So I just kind of chilled out for a few days and then took the test. Funny story, I had practiced driving to the testing center a million times so that I wouldn't be stressed out doing it, and that I could, have some music going the morning of. And then I actually missed my exit off the highway the morning of, so I had to backtrack. I thought I was going to miss the time. I was, whatever. It ended up being fine. I was studying a lot. I estimated around 450 plus hours of studying full time for this test. So yeah. So as you can see, we're kind of the theme of this talk is Madeleine and I, we're both successful on the test, but we both did things very differently. So there's not one right way of doing it. It's just sort of what works for you. So for content review, I use the Kaplan books, supplemented with Khan Academy when necessary, mostly. But most of my content came right from Kaplan. There's a math review section in one of the physics books. I didn't review any of that. If you are weak in math skills, especially if you're really not comfortable not having a calculator, I think that would be useful. I would say the biggest math part that is hard to do without a calculator is if you know exponent rules and stuff like that for math, then you'll be fine. And then I'm an Anki fanatic. I joke that I should get paid by them for how many people I recruit to use their stuff. The Miles Down Anki deck is a pre-made deck for MCAT studying. I downloaded that, and that was basically like my holy grail of content review. I love that thing. I love Anki. That's a whole other talk though that I've done before. So
I've tried to get into Anki and I don't know what it is. Even in med school, it's something it just doesn't, I can't crack it. But
yeah.
Yeah, and that, it ties back to everyone has different ways of doing things, and you find the things that you like to do that work for you and stick with them. So I also used the Kaplan book, so there's a good picture of them there. And then I used Khan Academy for, again, supplementing material. So if there were things that I was kind of confused on or that I didn't feel like I fully understood it from the Kaplan books or even from my classes before, I would use Khan Academy just to kind of like look at it a different way. Another thing that I found helpful was the MCAT Basics podcast. I took the exam during quarantine, so I really could not do much. It was before the vaccine was out in 2021. So I was, that was my way of getting out of the house was I would go on walks and I would listen to the MCAT Basics podcast and feel like I was studying while also getting in some nice exercise and being outside. So I do recommend that just because I feel like they kind of frame things in different ways, especially for me. My biggest struggle was the chemistry and physics part of the exam. I was a bio major and I had taken chem and physics before, but it's different than how it is on the exam. It's a lot of like almost like biologically based like questions that are then you're relying on your understanding of physics and chemistry in those scenarios, which I didn't really get during my classes in undergrad. So I like the MCAT Basics podcast because I felt like they were able to kind of like they would point out like this is what you really need to understand and know. And then also I did use like I made my own personal Quizlet and flashcards. One of the things I did because I knew that chemistry and physics was going to be a difficult subject for me was I wrote out all of the physics equations that you need to have memorized for the exam. I just put them on flashcards, and then I have a little whiteboard, which is currently my study whiteboard. Can't even see it. But I have a little personal whiteboard, and I would look at the flashcard and be like, this is the gas law equation. And then I would write it out so that I would have them all memorized. And that was really helpful for me.
Yeah, so practice questions I think is the most important. I think we'll get back to that a little bit later. Um, I Writing this exam and doing well on it, you can do inexpensively. If there's one, I mean, the AAMC stuff I think is 100% worth it. I loved UWorld. UWorld was what I liked doing it every day, all these questions. I actually thought it was kind of fun. Some people say I'm crazy, but that's okay. UWorld was expensive, but in my opinion, for me, was worth it. I like studying that way, just doing practice questions. I could trick myself into that it wasn't studying. I was just doing questions all day. They have good in-depth explanation for when you get things wrong or when you're confused. The question bank is massive. There's no way you're going to get through it unless you're studying for like over a year. It's in which case you're probably paying for a long subscription. You can pay for one if it's still the same as when I wrote it for a 2-month subscription. I think that's what I did and really condense the material. And then the AAMC stuff, obviously, again, really valuable because it's from the people who are writing the exam. So you know it's representative of the content. You don't have to have that debate. Jack Weston is free, which is nice. That's how I would sort of start my day. Every day was doing their little cars passage. And then Khan Academy, every once in a while, especially if I had a topic that wasn't really sticking in my head, they'll have questions embedded into their material. And that was just sort of a good way to help make sure I was understanding the new stuff that I was confused about. So those are the most of the resources that I used for practice questions.
Yeah, you can see that we have a lot of overlap in the practice questions we used because they're really good resources. I use the Kaplan. So the Kaplan books, the ones that I had like a question, almost like a little mini exam at the end of every passage. So as I was doing content review, I would stop and like take a chance to do those questions just to make sure like, okay, did I actually understand this chapter on this topic? Or is it something that I'm struggling with and I need to look at other outside resources? And if that would happen, I'd usually go over to Khan Academy. And like Trinity was saying, they have built-in questions that you can just kind of use them to test your understanding. I will say they're not like the MCAT questions. They're very discrete, where it's like, this is a specific question about a certain topic, whereas the MCAT does have questions like that, but they also have a lot of passage-based questions where you're reading like an article or you're reading some like a larger block of text and then having to analyze it and understand from that. And then you'll have like 5 questions in a row that are all related to that passage that you just read, where you don't really get that as much with the Kaplan and the Khan Academy questions that are related to certain sections. That being said, I did switch over to doing Kaplan practice exams pretty early on. So after I finished doing my review, I started doing the practice full-length exams. Those are, I think it's really important to note that the Kaplan exams are going to deflate your score a little bit. So even like they'll give you a score that's going to be lower than it would be on the AMC. There's some, it's a business and they do want to sell you on prep courses. And if you get a really high score, you might not buy a prep course because you'll feel good. So grade deflation is a real thing when it comes to second party or third party resources like Kaplan. I'm trying to Berkeley Review, I think is one of them, Princeton Review. All of those books are gonna kind of give you a lower score than you would actually be scoring on the exam itself. And then again, after I finished the Kaplan exams or went through a couple of them, I switched over to the AMC. I tried to save those for later in my studying just because I knew they would be the most similar to the actual exam. So I wanted to kind of get a better baseline about how I would do on the exam itself. So I saved those for later and they were super helpful. The AMC, the online prep online bundle has access to like question banks and to, I think it's 5 practice exams now. And then they have access to the question bank and like section banks where you can just go through and do practice questions that are going to be similar to what you'll actually see. And then, yeah, Jack Weston was really nice. They're all free. They have their cars passages are really recommended. They're super helpful and it's a good way just to start your day, like Trinity was saying, and to go through those. And then they also have like they'll give you those those passage-based questions. So you'll get a passage, you'll read it, and then you'll have like 5 questions that relate to that passage. So you can just kind of do those peppered in between. It's a good way to just to make sure that you're following along.
Full length's arguably like the most important aspect of building up stamina for being able to take the real exam. I used Blueprint ones to begin with, so I think I bought 4 of theirs. And then I switched to AAMC, like just like Madeleine did, closer to the test date. Blueprint was good, fairly representative, I would say. There is a little bit of grade deflation again when I switched over to AAMC, just because, they're trying to sell you on the prep courses. So just know that your every full length you take will give you a score range. So as long as you're scoring within a range that's desirable, then you're good probably once you switch over to AMC. And then AMC was what I used closer to the exam. Really representative, obviously, same company that writes the actual exam. And their interface was nice for reviewing also, I found. So those are the 2 full lengths that I used. I think I came to settle on Blueprint just because it was reasonably priced. I could buy 4 of them, and judging on what people had said online, it was like decently representative. So That's sort of what I settled on, but I don't really think there's a way you could go necessarily wrong. But the AAMC ones are definitely ones that you want to buy. If you don't buy any other full lengths ever, buy the AAMC ones.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. The AMC, that's the scores that I was getting on the AMC full length exams ended up being the closest to my actual score. Whereas the Blueprint and Kaplan, I ended up scoring like 10 to 15 points lower than my AMC scores on those just because of the grade deflation, which can be a little bit disheartening when you're getting those scores back. So yeah, I used Kaplan, which I think it was included with my bundle with the books. I think I had access to 3 full-length exams with them. And then again, I knew that I was weak in chemistry and physics, so I really wanted to focus on that. So I ended up buying blueprint exams. I think I got 7. And then I just did for some of them, I did the full-length exam, but then for some of them, I only did the chemistry and physics just to keep giving myself exposure to more questions and learning how to like work through different types of questions and use different equations and all of that. So that was really helpful for me. Another thing with Blueprint, I know this is going to be recorded, but I'm not going to say it actually. Never mind. But you could go home with friends. You know, that's another thing is you can restart the exam. So that's an option if you're looking to be economical. But again, the AMC, those are going to be the ones that are the most representative of the actual exam. That's really the question, the way that their questions are written and the way that they're scored is similar to what you'll see on test day. So I remember it being a huge relief when I took my first AMC real exam, full length exam, because it went a lot smoother and it felt better than the Kaplan and Blueprint exams that I've been taking before, because again, they're really tricky, but they're good practice. And it's good to kind of have to work through those questions and see what are your specific weak spots. Okay, so a day in the life of MCAT studying. So I like to wake up early. I would usually wake up around 6 and I would just have a nice morning, relax, have breakfast, just kind of start my day off nice. And then at 8 a.m., I would start studying. So I usually would start with the Jack Weston Cars practice. So they would have those passages and I would just do like a cars section. It's kind of a nice way to ease into things, I felt like. And it's good with cars, a lot of the times I would have no idea what the passage was about. I'd never heard of it. It was a new experience. And it's just good to kind of get into the mindset of like, how do I understand? How do I look at these questions? How do I analyze this passage? And how do you're not going to know the topic it's on. It's not quizzing you about a specific topic. It's really looking at how you're able to read and digest information. I would also use Quizlet. So I had my own personal Quizlet where I know that I mentioned that I would put formulas on there. For Quizlet itself, I did like to do different ones on the social sciences and the psychology aspect of the exam. A lot of times they'll ask you about specific terms in like psychology or sociological terms. So a lot of that was just kind of memorizing those terms and knowing, okay, this is an example of this and being able to apply it in that way. And then I had mentioned before that like I would like to find weak spots. So if there were things that I knew I just wasn't grasping and topics that were really difficult for me to understand, which a lot of times ended up being physics, I would kind of focus on those and try to look at them in different ways. So I would spend a good amount of time just looking at the topics that I knew I was struggling with and needed a little extra help in. And I would do specific practice questions that related to that. So that's another opportunity to use Khan Academy or, if I'm like I was struggling in the physics to do just the blueprint section for that exam. I would take a break, like an hour-long break in the middle of the day, and then have my lunch, relax a little bit, and then I would just go straight into practice questions. So I really liked doing the AMC practice questions and just trying to get through all of those. I know when I took the exam, there was a section bank question and section bank and question bank. And they were a little bit different where I feel like the question bank the question bank was a little bit more difficult types of questions. So just trying to get through those, I think that's really helpful. If you can finish all of the AMC questions from start to finish, that'll be really helpful just because you're going to be exposed to all the different ways that they can ask you questions. And then I would take my walk in the afternoon at 4 to 5 and listen to the MCAT Basics podcast. I really liked, again, it was just a different way to think about things. I'd have dinner and just take a little break. And then after 7 p.m., that's when I would pull out my whiteboard and just go through the physics equations and make sure that I was able to write those down and have them memorized.
So I also like to I favor waking up a bit earlier to have more time to relax in the morning versus, the person that wakes up 10 minutes before they have to leave. That's just not me. So I would wake up sometime around 7 and have breakfast till about 8. From 8 to 9, I would do all of my miles down Anki cards that were due for that day. So at this point, you have to keep in mind that during my content review, I had already worked through all the new cards. So there were no more new cards due. They were just cards that were due for review. So usually that would take me about an hour to get through all of them. Sundays it would be really nice and you log on and you only have like 40 cards due. And some days you log on and you have 260 cards due. So it varies sometimes, but just get through them and you'll be okay. From 9 to 11, I would do Jack Weston first, the cars passage, just to sort of get my brain going. And then I would switch to U World. I would do Chem Phys and Cars. So I would do about half to 3/4 worth of the same amount of questions you would see on a full length. And I would do them in the order of the sections that would be presented to me on the exam. So I would start with Chem Phys and then do Cars. And then after that, from 11 to 12, I'd usually go for a walk. It was summertime spring, summer when I was doing this. So it was just a nice way to reset, get outside, change of scenery, as opposed to my white wall in my room, because that's where I was spending most of my day. And then I would have lunch and relax. So about a 2-hour break in the middle of the day. And then U World for biochem and psych soc. Again, in the same order that you would see it on the exam for about 3 hours. And then I would review things from all the U World things as I went. And obviously there was less mistakes to review the later in the studying process you got because you were getting better. And then from 4 to 5, I would do a full length cars section on U World in about an hour and 20 minutes. Cars was just I wasn't terrible at it, but it's just different. So seeing as many varieties of passages as you could, that's I think the section on U World I worked my way through the most. I think I used almost all of their questions, just because sometimes you luck out. It's luck of the draw a little bit with the cars passages that you get. If you like reading history and stuff about psychology and social problems, you could luck out and have all those passages be on your exam, or you could have me and just be wishing and hoping that you don't get a philosophy passage on your cars passage, because those are like impossible. It's like you don't even know what you've read and somehow you're talking about the existence of life, and I don't know. So that's what I would do. So I would mimic my schedule the same way that I would see it on the exam. There's some like psychology research that's been done that say if you take the exam at the same time you're used to taking that class, people tend to perform better. So I thought, any little bit that could help me, why not? So that's sort of what I did. But you can see it was like basically a 9 to 5 job, and then nighttime I was doing whatever. I was watching TV, not thinking about the MCAT at all. If there were some things that weren't sticking, I would identify them for the next day and maybe allot some of this time to that. And U World is also good because you can tailor the questions that you want to see. If there's a specific area, like Madeleine said, that you were struggling in, you can tailor the questions to be from certain areas. So if you are doing the biochem section and you are really weak in like cellular respiration or any questions about that process, you can tailor the U World generator to only give you questions from that topic area. So you can really reinforce messages that aren't getting through. So that's sort of what.
Yeah, so for the full length exams, I would try to mimic testing conditions as much as I could. So again, I'd wake up at 6, have my breakfast, just kind of relax. And then I didn't do this for every full length exam that I took, but for the very last one, I did kind of luck out and I was able to find a testing center close to me. I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and I think we had there were a lot of testing centers available. So luckily, I was able to get something pretty close by. So on my very last practice full length, I actually drove there and parked in the parking lot. Again, I actually ended up getting lost on the day of. I pulled into the wrong parking lot. So things are going to happen, which is why I tried to get there 30 minutes early. Also, the testing check-in process is a lot longer than I realized it would be. And there's little nuances, like you're not allowed to wear scrunchies if you're a girl or if you have long hair and want to pull it back. You can't use like a big puffy scrunchie. Just little things like that. So make sure you have a hair elastic. Anyway, there's a lot of like little tiny things that I didn't realize. So giving myself extra time to get there, get checked in, be waiting comfortably in the waiting room for when they're going to let everyone go back into the testing center was really important. So then I would take the full length exam, or the practice full length. So I would sit down and then I would just treat it exactly like testing conditions. So you're going to have breaks that are given in between sections, but then that's about it. And you have a longer lunch break given between the cars section and the biochem. So that kind of like splits your day into two, like Trinity was saying when she was doing her study schedule. So I wouldn't take breaks. I wouldn't go to the bathroom. I would just kind of focus through those sections and then take the break if I wanted to. You also don't have to take the breaks if you don't want to, and you can just continue on to the next section. But yeah, so that was my technique, was to really treat it like it was a full-length exam. And then after I took the exam, I'd be done after, those 7.5 hours. I would look over the answers that I'd missed during the day, just to make sure that I was like I would look through at every single problem that I missed, just to be kind of give myself like, I'm not exactly sure of the psychology term, but there's something about looking at, I didn't want to like commit anything to memory or think about, anything if it was wrong. So I wanted to look at it first and be like, okay, I got this wrong. But then the next day, I would actually take those questions that I had missed. I would put them into a Google Doc. I had like a Google slide or like Excel sheet kind of thing, where I would take the questions that I missed. I would write, why did I miss it? What was the correct answer? And then how was I supposed to find the correct answer with all that information? And then also I would put in like my advice for myself for next time. I had a tendency for, if there was something that I didn't know the answer to, or I was a little shaky about it, I would pick the question that the like option that was something I didn't know, because I was like, oh, well, if I'm not 100% sure on this, it must be this thing that I don't know anything about. And that happened a lot on all my practice exams. So it was nice to kind of like realize that's the mistake that I'm making there, and adjust for that in the future. So that's when I would really go through like with a fine tooth comb, all of the questions and see, why did I miss this? What should I do next time? And then also there were a few questions where maybe I got lucky and I really didn't know that content as well as I should know, but I guessed the right answer. So I'd also put those in there too, just to make sure that I was really like focusing on any of the weak spots.
Yeah, so mine, I wanted to mimic like Madeline did, like the same testing time that you would write it on the actual exam. I didn't want to, start my exam at 2 in the afternoon and finish at 9 p.m. I didn't really think that was going to be beneficial because that's not when I would be taking the exam. So I did a full length every Friday for 8 weeks straight. And I think my last week I might have done 2 full lengths. I think I did one on a Wednesday and then one on a Friday. And then I didn't have any studying after that. So this was sort of a Friday routine for me. I would get up, wake up and have breakfast. I wanted a quiet place that no one was going to disturb me. So we have private rooms in my library at my school, my university. So I would book one of those rooms out. I like to joke that with the one that I would always book the same room out. I should go like put my name on the wall in there or something, because I was literally there every Friday for 2 months. And it's the middle of summer, no one's on campus. The librarians are probably like, what is this girl doing here? Um, but I didn't have a car at the time, so I would bike to school to sort of mimic the commute. It was also a good way to get the blood flowing, listen to some music, get some fresh air. And then 8 to 3:30, practice full length. I did the same thing as Madeline. I took the breaks that was allotted. I wasn't breaking in the middle of a section if I had to go to the bathroom. I was sitting through it, paying attention to the questions, and then I was taking the breaks in between. The 15-minute breaks, I would usually exit the room that I was in because it's a little cubicle thing and kind of claustrophobic in there. I would go walk around the floor on the library and just like, meander around, not try to convince myself to not think of any of the other questions that I'd already written, because at this point the answer is locked in, so it doesn't matter. I can't change it. And then the longer break for lunch, I had, I don't know if we talk about this later. it's been a year since we've given this presentation, but getting in the routine of when/what I was eating and drinking every day. I would mimic that with the full length also, and then I would finish at 3:30. And then I didn't review the same day. I saved it till the day after usually, or if something was coming up on the Saturday, the Sunday. I would just give that was like the finale of my week, Monday to Friday. So I would give myself just, some grace and time to do whatever I wanted on the Friday and not think about the MCAT for a few hours. So we do talk about it. Okay. So mimicking test day is really important because you want to mimic the same environment you're going to be in to the best of your ability, because that's just going to increase your comfort with the situation overall. You're not going to be anxious about this, that, and the other thing. Obviously, there's some things that aren't going to happen. Like at my MCAT testing center, which should be consistent across all of them, every time I left the room, I had to show them my ID. I had to turn my pockets out. I had to scan this. Obviously, I can't mimic that in my library, but I would wear the same clothes. So I had come up with like an outfit that was comfortable. It was something I wasn't going to get too hot or too cold in, depending on the temperature of the room. I was used to it, so I did that. I always took it in a quiet room. So like I said, it was private. I took the required breaks because I knew I wanted to do that on testing day. So on my full lengths, I did that as well. I ate the same food every Friday, just so that I knew something that was gonna sit well. It wasn't gonna upset my stomach. It was enough food that I wasn't hungry, but I also wasn't making me crash and burn. I wasn't having, a giant bowl of pasta in the middle of my test. Getting used to headphones, I knew I wanted to take advantage of the noise canceling headphones that were going to be offered to me at my testing center. It's a habit I've kept up since actually, which is kind of funny. But I always wore my headphones over top of my ears so that I wasn't going to be on test day be like, oh my God, this is bugging my ears. I'm not used to having something over my ears for 8 hours because it does put a little bit of pressure. You kind of have to get used to it. And then I would also always start at the same time. So I was pretty rigid about that. I didn't want to start any later. I treated it as if someone was checking me in at 8:30, and that was when I started, and then I just went.
Yeah, I did the same thing. I think starting at the specific time is really helpful. I don't know if Canada also offers an afternoon exam, but I know that's something that is available in America. Yeah. So if you do want to take the afternoon exam, if you are a night owl and you feel like you're more productive in the afternoon to evening, that's also an option. But again, just sticking to the times that you signed up for. So for me, I like the morning. I knew that 8 a.m. was going to be a good time for me. And it was good just to try to like get into that rhythm. Again, you don't want to be taking breaks that you're not allotted, and wandering off or like closing a section, taking an hour-long break, and then coming back and opening it and then going from there. Just because you're not going to have that opportunity during the exam. So I think it's really important to really try to mimic the actual conditions as much as possible. For me, I love to drink coffee. So I had to, you're not allowed to bring any drinks into the testing center. So I always have I have a spindrift right now. I always have a cup of coffee when I'm studying. So that was something that I really tried to train myself on early was no snacks, no drinks, no nothing, just you and the exam. Again, I like to listen to music. So I had to train myself not to be listening to music while I was taking the exam. I don't think we had noise canceling headphones offered at my location. I know they did have earbuds though, or like those earplugs. So if those are something that you're interested in, or if you get distracted by noises, you will be in the exam room with other people. So it might be helpful to try to get comfortable with those and see how well they work. Again, I did not you're not allowed to have a calculator on the MCAT at all. You're also not provided like a formula sheet or anything. So I really, even when it would be frustrating and I knew like, oh, I just need that one equation, but I can't remember specifically if this, is in the numerator or the denominator, like I just would not, I would just miss those questions. And then I knew that I needed to understand the formulas and really have them memorized going into the exam. So I wouldn't allow myself to like, just take a little peek at the formula sheet just so I can get through this question. Like none of that. I really did try to mimic it. Like I was taking the exam as much as possible. I also ate the same meals and snacks. Again, you don't want to have to be running to the bathroom because you're not going to be able to. So just to know what to expect from my body on the exam was really important. I think I had a breakfast burrito. No, I had tofu scramble, and then I had a sweet potato and black bean burrito that was the same thing I ate like every single full length exam and then on actual test day because I wanted something that I knew wouldn't go bad while it was sitting in my locker. And then something that I knew wouldn't upset my stomach and that I was used to and easy to digest. And again, I wouldn't be hungry, but I also wouldn't be too full. So it's about finding something that you like and then also something that you like and are looking forward to having it as a snack. I think that's important too. And then I tried to use a quiet space. For the first full lengths, I would take them at my desk at home. And then for the later ones, I tried to get out in public just because unfortunately you are going to be in a room with other people. So for me, I was trying to get used to being with other people around me. And then not distracted by them and not start, people watching or zoning out a little bit, to really just train myself to kind of like zone in on the exam and let the world, just kind of dissolve around me.
Going back to what you said about the formula sheet and not looking at answers that you know you didn't have. The biggest difference between your computer and the one at the MCAT testing center is that your computer has an internet connection. And especially for a lot of the full length exams, there are massive Google Sheets where you can look at every single answer for the full length exam. And it's tempting sometimes when you're like, oh, if I just look here, I know that I can find the answer. Don't do it. It doesn't tell you what you're going to do wrong. It's going to inflate your score. You're going to be, oh, I knew that. You didn't actually know it. And it's better to just be honest with yourself because that's going to lead to a better score in the long run. I know it's tempting. There's a couple times where, like Madeleine said, you're like, I can see where this is written down in my notes and it's just not coming to me. So you just kind of have to rely on other skills to try to deduce the answer with a lack of information. Yeah. And then like I said, I tried to control my environment as much as possible. There was one day where I showed up to campus and they were drilling away outside doing construction, and it was not ideal, but I was like, if there's construction on test day, I'm still gonna have to write it. So you just persevere and kind of push through and learn to mimic it as best as possible. Yeah. I think my food was rice cakes, some like veggie sticks and hummus, and then like some trail mix. I think that's what I ate. Yeah. It's like ingrained in my mind. Oh gosh.
I haven't eaten that like tofu
Yeah, no,
scramble.
I haven't eaten it since either.
Do
Um,
you want to go?
First I guess I'll take the first one and then if you have anything to add. Don't spend too much time on content review. So there's like a little bit of a famous saying, the MCAT's like a mile wide and an inch deep. So you need to know a lot of information, but not a whole lot of detail about any one piece of information, if that makes sense. So there's a habit that you kind of don't want to. A lot of people who are taking the MCAT are also in, you know, scientifically based majors where you're used to having to memorize every single detail for your final because you're going to have to give this whole long written answer. It's just not really the same. So getting used to that style of questioning. Don't spend too much time on content review. You're never going to know everything you need to know from all of those textbooks verbatim before you start questions. So really, have faith in the courses that you should have, most people would have taken when they're writing the MCAT, that there is a base level of knowledge that that you're going to be able to fall back onto, and then only supplement with content review past a certain point when there's something that's really not sticking. So, being like, oh, I didn't do well on my last full length. So I'm going to spend the next 2 weeks reviewing content again is really not going to be that productive.
Yeah, I can jump on for some of these last points. So again, I'd spent like a month on content review and it was helpful. I thought at the time I was doing the right thing, that I was supposed to, if I got through all of these books from start to finish, that would, that would be the thing to do. And in some ways it was helpful, but it doesn't address the problems that you're having. So like I'd spend an hour, 2 hours reviewing stuff that like I was already pretty comfortable with, especially for my major or from all the prerequisite classes that you have to take to get into med school anyway. Like that's what's going to be on the MCAT. So it wasn't a super good use of my time just because I was just relearning things that I already knew and probably was going to do well on anyway. So I didn't really need to focus on them that much. Whereas practice questions, once you start doing those and start seeing, okay, this is what I'm missing, these are the gaps in my knowledge, I feel like it's just a better use of time. And then again, if you're using something like Anki where you're able to flag the things that you are struggling with and want to see again, that might have been a better way to do it. That's not what I was doing. So I was just seeing everything. Whereas it's probably like with UWorld and Anki, then you're able to tailor it to exactly what you want to see again and have that pattern or repetition. Pace repetition, that's the word. But yeah. So another tip is to register early to get the testing center you want. As Trinity was saying, this is easier said than done. Sometimes you can be on there at, right when it opens and it still isn't an option, unfortunately, especially if you live in a place that doesn't have that many testing centers available. So try to get on as early as possible to be there like right when it opens up. But again, if it doesn't happen, it's good because even if you're registering early, you'll be able to come with like a game plan for if you do have to travel. I know one of my classmates ended up having to fly to a different country to take her MCAT, which is just wild. But it happens. So it's nice to be able to have that done early and then be able to come up with a plan B if you need to. Familiarize yourself with interpreting journal articles. I think this is something that it's a lot of the MCAT, like I was saying, when they're giving you a passage, a lot of time it's very similar to scientific journal articles that you would be reading. I was able to see those in my undergrad. In my major, we did spend a lot of time going and dissecting journal articles and like what techniques are they using? What exactly, when they've knocked out this gene that is an inhibitor for this thing, what is going to happen? Like you have to kind of start thinking and things will cancel out and you have to start like interpreting that. So journal articles are a good way to see that. And then if it's your first time seeing a scientific article on the MCAT, they're tough and they're really dense and they have a lot of information that may or may not be important. So learning how to really analyze them is super important. So you could join a journal club at your school. A lot of times that's something that's offered. Even just reading through journals and again, doing practice questions that are article based will be really helpful for you to learn how to digest that material because it's dense and there's a lot of like almost like dead ends that you can go down and think like get distracted by. So it's important to just to be comfortable with that. This is one of the most important things that we here at Pre-Med CC say all the time, which is take the exam only when you feel ready and don't take it for practice. You don't want to, I know so many people that have taken the MCAT without studying, without preparation, just to be like, to use it as a baseline and to get, just to get practice with it and to see what it's really going to be like. Don't do that because that score is going to be saved. And yes, you can retake the exam and do better and get a higher score, but you don't want to do that if you don't have to. So you really should be waiting until you're scoring in the practice range or on the practice exams, if you're scoring in the range that you're comfortable with and want to have a score in that range. So again, if you want to get practice and you want to get familiar with the exam beforehand, that's what you want to do. That's the best way to do it. But you should be using the practice exams for that and not actually taking the full length exam because that score will be saved. It will be on your record. Some schools will take an average if you have 2 MCAT scores. So if you score really poorly on it because you haven't practiced and you're just doing it to see what the exam is like, and then you do really well later, they're going to average out the 2 scores. And it's not worth having that on your record. If you're able to just take it once, do really well, do the score that you want, and then move on from there, that's going to be a better option for you.
Yeah, there's interpreting the information that you're given is really the key. I remember one of the questions it was either my actual exam or one of my practice full lengths where I'm reading this whole thing, I'm looking at these graphs and I'm like, when I look at the question, I'm like, I didn't need to know any of the information that they just told me in that whole passage. So a lot of it is they're gauging your ability to synthesize answers from information that you're given, or synthesize the fact that you don't need to know the information that they just gave you to answer the question. So that's kind of part of the game that they're playing. So being able to identify the key points that you're given and then being able to match the questions that you're given with those key points. And sometimes, they're telling you all about this one thing and you really don't need to know about it. And it's kind of annoying. But once again, that comes with like doing as many practice questions as possible to get used to that style. And then start doing cars practice early. So the beauty of cars is that you don't need to know any information. Any person on the street can go do a cars passage. They don't have to have a major that has anything science related at all. You need to be able to read, and that's what cars is. It's tougher than that, don't get me wrong, but at its base level, it's reading comprehension. So if you know you're taking the MCAT in a year and you don't need to start studying for, 7 months, 10 months, whatever your timeline's going to be, just do like the Jack Weston Cars passage is free. Just do it every day or a couple times a week just to get used to answering those kinds of questions and um, build up your understanding and sort of your repertoire of questions within different subject fields. Like I said, like philosophy passages I hated. I never liked doing those. Luckily, I didn't get one on my test. And it's also ideal. A lot of people's section that they struggle with the most is cars. So it's kind of nice that you can start practicing so early and sort of start building up confidence on those kinds of questions. All right. So that's our whole presentation. Obviously, there's things that I'm sure we left unsaid. So if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the Q&A. I think we have 4 already. I can stop sharing my screen. All right.
I can start with one of the first ones. So
Sure.
one of our questions is, what are your thoughts on sketchy MCAT series for content review? So now that I'm in medical school, I love sketchy. I'm obsessed. I really like sketchy. I like pixorize. I love those. So if you're not familiar with sketchy, it's basically they use visual mnemonics to help you like retain information. So instead of having to just memorize everything, you can kind of connect it to a visual mnemonic. They'll like draw a picture and it will explain things and give you like little hints to help you memorize things. So I think it does depend. I haven't seen the sketchy for content review for the MCAT, but I've used it a lot in medical school and I found it very helpful. Again, that's just something that I like. Some of my classmates just don't like sketchy or pixorize. It doesn't work for them. It doesn't really make sense of anything because it's really just to help you memorize like discrete facts. So I think it's something for you to kind of look at and say, is this actually going to help me? And if you are using it, I would kind of recommend putting that in a different category. I think you should still be doing practice questions. You should be doing content review, but then maybe like the way that I use sketchy now is that I use it kind of as a fun thing. Like when I'm eating lunch, I'll watch a sketchy video, or when I'm have nothing to do, I'll go outside and I'll watch some videos. And it's just a good way for me to take the information that I've already learned in other ways and just try to like cement it in and help me so that I don't have those like, oh man, this is on, it's on the tip of my tongue, but I can't remember it. That's when those mnemonics will be really helpful. And that's when you can kind of remember like, oh yeah, there's a cat in the video. So it's catalase positive, like silly things like that, but they actually do make a difference and are really helpful. So if it works for you, I would recommend doing it. But again, you just kind of want to use that as like a supplement material. You're not really learning anything from it necessarily. You should really be comfortable with the content beforehand and then just use that as a way to like cement that knowledge.
Next one is, how many points would you say your scores were deflated on the second party site? So I think Madeleine had a bit more of an inflated deflation than I did. It's a bit of a weird way to put it. I would say mine was deflated about 6 points on average, like 5 to 6 points was how much mine was deflated. Luckily, I was very surprised with the first like full length that I did. So I didn't have a lot of like range with my score over my entire process. Like once I started doing the exams, they were fairly consistent. But between the 2 sites that I used, the Blueprint one was deflated slightly, but not dramatically. I think Madeline, you said yours was like 15 points sometimes.
Yeah, my first, again, I'm not sure if it was because it was the very first practice full length that I took. But it was deflated quite a bit. It was down 15 points. And then it gradually went up a little bit, but I was never able to break 510 on Kaplan. On Blueprint, it was closer to the range that you're talking about, like 6-ish, 5 to 10 points deflation for Blueprint. So I think Kaplan, there's somewhere I think it's on Reddit or something where they have a breakdown of the deflation across the site. So that's another thing, is it really does vary. I think the Princeton review, I'm not 100% sure if it's still the same, but that was actually the most deflation. Then Kaplan, then Blueprint, and then the AMC are going to be really representative of what you actually see on the exam. So I remember being so happy because it was a 13-point difference between my first first Kaplan exam versus my first AMC full-length exam. And it's a nice relief. So that's another thing. If you leave the AMC for the very end, you'll get more practice, you'll have seen more questions. And then also it's just kind of a relief going into the exam, like, oh, okay, cool. I'm actually scoring in this range where I thought I was at this point beforehand. So, but yeah, it varies across sites. I can read the next one, which is, what techniques do you recommend for content review instead of passive reading? That's a really good question. For content review, I would read the sections, but I had a Google Doc where I would write notes on it. Like, this is what I think is important out of this section. I would like highlight information, or I would kind of like try to reword things in a way to make sure that I was really understanding it. And then again, I would do those practice questions at the end of each section. So I felt like that was a good way to check that I was actually following along. Passive reading never really works for me, because again, it's just, I can kind of read something and just like zone out and not actually digest any of the information on the page, but I read it, but it didn't stick. So I think having to rewrite things in your own words was really helpful for me. So that's what I like to do. And then again, just using those questions along the way to test your knowledge.
Yeah, I also took notes as I was reading, so that or forced me to be paying attention and then be identifying the key information to make on the notes. Like my notes were nowhere near as long as those chapters. Like I was really trying to keep it to about a page-ish per chapter, just to make sure I was really taking what I needed from it. And then I was the big Anki girl during this whole process. So active recall, spaced repetition for content review is really helpful for me. I think the miles down Anki, I don't even remember how many cards it is, thousands of cards. It's huge. But somehow by the end of it all, you know every card in that deck, and it's crazy. But that's what I found works, and that's I think been really helpful even throughout the rest of my undergrad after I was done the MCAT. Maintaining that has been a really good study tool for me. Passive reading isn't ideal. A lot of people like Madeleine, you can be reading something for like 10 pages and not absorb a single word of it. I save all of my lecture notes from the courses that I take. So if one of the sections was in one of the books was really just not worded in a way that was sticking in my brain, and I knew I had taken a lecture on it, I would revisit that because I could sort of, hear my professor saying what they were saying on the slide and be like, oh, that's what she said about this. That's what he said about this. So that was another technique that I used. Next one is, what are some lunch or snack recommendations for energy? I think like we already said, I was rice cakes, trail mix, some veggies just for some like fiber to keep you full. I would say stay away from anything like super sugary. Like don't be like, you know what, I'm gonna have like some waffles or something with a bunch of Nutella on it in the middle of the day. I think that's probably not the best idea because that's just gonna create a sugar crash and then you're gonna burn out a little bit. Nothing too big. I didn't want to be uncomfortably full during my exam, and I would say bring something that you've packed that's homemade. Don't stop at a restaurant on your way to the testing center and bring that in because if, I've had maybe food poisoning like once in my whole life, but I didn't want to roll the dice on that when I was writing probably one of the most important tests of my life.
Yeah, definitely. If you can avoid food poisoning, that's always a plus. And that's another thing. Like when you're packing something, make sure it's not something that's going to go bad. Like this isn't the time to bring in like egg salad or something because they don't have refrigerators. It's just going to be sitting in a locker. So you really don't want anything that's going to spoil and get you sick. And then yeah, I don't even know what you would do in that situation. So I really love coffee. I like to drink coffee. I like caffeine. I usually have like 3, 4 cups of coffee. No, 3 cups of coffee. We'll say 3 cups of coffee. But I sometimes get jittery. So that's something that I know about myself. And it doesn't always happen, but I just didn't want to risk it on the exam day. So I really did restrict myself to 1 cup of coffee. That way I knew I didn't have to run to the bathroom. And I wouldn't be jittery because I'm already going to be, it's the MCAT. Like I was already anxious going into it. I didn't want to add on caffeine induced jitters on top of all of that. So even if you do like caffeine, try to train yourself again with those practice exams, eating the same thing, to just stick to one, or if you really need it, 2 cups of coffee, but no more after that, just to prevent yourself from getting anxious. And then for energy, again, you really don't want anything too heavy. What I did, I made these, like, I really like Lara bars. They sell like this peanut butter chocolate Lara bar. So I just made my own version of that with dates and peanuts and chocolate, and made like little energy balls that I took in between, or I brought them to eat in between bio and psych, just to like finish strong. I ended up not having them, but something like that, like a granola bar if you really like them, or something that's going to keep you, just give you that boost of energy that you need. And again, try to eat, you want fiber. I had my tofu scramble with a bunch of veggies and like toast, I think, for breakfast. But that was like, that was to get me started on my day. And then I had that little burrito, the black bean and sweet potato. I don't know why I ate vegan food. I'm not vegan, but for the the test itself, I like ended up eating all these vegan foods. I think because, again, I didn't want anything that I would go bad in the testing center. So I just wanted to cancel out any variables of dairy or meat or anything. And that worked for me. And again, you'll have time. Like if you take the first practice full length, or even like the second one, you're like, I'm still hungry and I didn't like the food that I ate, and this isn't going to work for me. Like you'll have time to adjust that to find what really does work for you. And then once you find something that feels comfortable and good, then you'll just want to stick with that.
Yeah, and just like what Madeline said about breakfast, if you're taking the morning exam, try to train yourself to have, if you're really not a breakfast person, try to train yourself over the course of your full lengths to at least have something, because it's like it's a long day in front of a computer. And if you haven't eaten anything and you're waiting for that second break and you are exhausted during cars, that's probably like the worst section to be exhausted in, arguably. So make sure that you're at least eating something, even if it's just like a bar or like a piece of fruit. Try to get yourself on the breakfast train.
And when you're thinking that much, like you're burning a lot more calories than you realize when you're really, really studying and really focused on a difficult exam. Even if maybe you weren't that hungry when you're at home doing that and we're fine not having breakfast, like come test day, the situation is going to be a little bit different, and your brain is going to be on hyperdrive. So yeah, you want to make sure that you're fueling yourself properly.
The next one is, did you test prep with any specific company, or did you feel like prepping on your own was best? Madeline and I both didn't use any courses. We both did it sort of DIY. So we definitely used resources that we paid for, but we didn't follow along someone else's schedule. I just felt like DIY was the way to go for me because I know that I can self-motivate enough to be successful. I didn't need someone regulating me. And I also wanted to have the flexibility of identifying areas where I needed to improve rather than having to follow a pre-designated progression. Where, if I had done one of those prep courses and they're like, okay, this week we're going to be looking at like cell structure and DNA. It's like, okay, well, I know a lot of that from my degree, so I don't need a week of that. What I need is a week of you explaining to me these mirror problems in physics, which I was like, those are not my strong suit at all. So that's why I chose not to do the prep companies. And they're also, don't get me wrong, writing this test the way I did it was expensive enough with the resources that I bought. So I could imagine how much money that would have cost to spend, like some of these test courses are like $1,500, I think. So yeah, definitely not necessary.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, they're really expensive. That's one of the big things. And then again, being able to make your own schedule is super nice. Also, Trinity and I we had been in undergrad, like there wasn't a big break in between. Both of us had been taking classes up until taking the MCAT. So we were both pretty the material wasn't that new to us. We had been seeing it over the past couple of years. So I think that's important and something to kind of look at if you've taken a long gap year, or like have taken a few gap years, or you're just deciding to go into medicine after getting your degree in something else and being in a different field, then your situation might be a little bit different, where maybe taking a prep course might be helpful if you haven't seen that material in a long time and really do have to start from the beginning. So it's important to kind of look at what are the resources that you have available, what do you want to do? What can you afford to do? And then just what is your specific situation? So I don't think they're not necessary. Like I did in my situation, I thought that prepping on my own was the best because again, it gives you that flexibility to really focus on what you need to do. But again, I had been studying during COVID for the past 2 years, so I knew that I would be able to stick to a study schedule and be able to like motivate myself to do that. But if you haven't taken online courses, maybe you need a little bit more support, or maybe you need a stricter schedule just to make sure that you're hitting all the areas that you need to. So just look at what works for you. You can also, there's MCAT tutors where then you get a little bit of both. I don't know how, I'm pretty sure they're very expensive, but maybe if you're struggling with creating a schedule or struggling with, how to effectively review content that you've missed before and like how to learn it afterwards, maybe looking into an MCAT tutor might be a good alternative as well instead of doing a course.
Yeah, I also, in the year, I knew when I wanted to write my test. So in the year leading up, I had already fulfilled my psychology requirement for my degree, but I actually took another psych course that year leading up, just so that stuff was fresh in my mind a bit more than rather having, because I took like, Psych 1000 or whatever it was that was online, DE. I was probably, looking at answers online for every question and not really looking at anything. I elected to add that into my schedule. And I took developmental psychology, which a lot of the questions on the MCAT have to deal with like childhood theories and theories of development. So that was really helpful. So if anyone has that course, that's a great one to take. And I had fulfilled all of the basic sciences by the time I had written my course. So again, like the base of knowledge was strong, but might, like Madeleine said, might be valuable if your major is completely different than that, or if you've been away from that material for a really long time. The next one is, do you think using free resources that people provide is good, or is it necessary to buy certain things like AMC?
I would say if you're not going to, if finances are an issue, the AMC does have fee assistance on certain things, I believe, including MCAT signing up for it, and then as well as getting access to the bundle. So if finances are a problem, that is definitely something that you can get help with. But I mean, if you're only going to buy one thing, it has to be AMC. Like this is something that you really do need going into the exam. Free resources like Khan Academy and Jack Weston are great and super helpful, but you really do want to have that full length practice exams that you can only get through the AMC. And then also having access to their question banks, which is included in the online bundle, are super, super helpful and a really good way to make sure that you're understanding the content at the level that the AMC is requiring. So that's the one thing that I would say is absolutely required. And again, you can get help with that if you need it. You can apply for that and they'll help offset some of those costs. I think it can even be free. So that would be that. But when it comes to other resources, I don't know. I'll let Trinity go for it. But Kaplan was helpful, but I don't know if it's completely required if you like Khan Academy or if you've taken these classes recently and are comfortable with the knowledge and have your prior notes on it. But again, you just want to see as many practice problems as you can. And unfortunately, a lot of these companies are making money that way by having practice full length exams behind a paywall. So you do have to pay for them. But
Yeah, the books, you can definitely figure out ways to get those for free. Lots of libraries have them. People pass them down. It's like the last thing they want to see after they write this. So they just kind of want to get rid of them. That's how I got mine. Um, uh, AMC, I would agree, is absolutely required. If you go into that test without having seen a single practice question, that's not going to go well. I loved UWorld. It was expensive. I wouldn't say it's absolutely required, but I would say if there was another resource that was paid that I could recommend for practice questions, that would be it. And the question bank is absolutely massive. Like there are so many, so you don't need to supplement with other material, like other question banks that you're paying for. It's kind of like a one fits all. So that was really good. But I agree. AMC would be required for me. Like I don't know anyone that's done the MCAT without buying that resource. Whereas there's been lots of people that buy it without doing UWorld. Yeah.
And then the next question is, how did you prioritize your mental health during this time? And that's a really good question because the MCAT's a beast. Like it really is, it's tough. And it can be so frustrating when you're getting scores that you're not wanting to get and you're missing questions that you felt like you understood and then you're realizing you're not. So it's really important to be kind to yourself and know that, you are more than just a number. Um, Now that I'm in med school, I have so many friends that have done, varying levels of, different scores on the exam, and it's all across the board. And they're incredible students. They're smart. They're really capable. And it can be so tempting to just kind of like assign yourself to the score you're getting and kind of, that, and then there's so much more to your story. So, I think being really kind and patient with yourself is important. Again, I liked to take walks during this time to get outside, be in nature. He was my boyfriend at the time. He's now my fiance. We lived together, and like just to spend time with him and, maintaining my relationships with my friends and going hiking and doing things that I loved, and not making my entire life the MCAT because like Trinity said earlier, it's a mile wide and an inch deep, and you can just lose yourself in trying to cover every single aspect of everything. But there's a point where you have to still allow yourself to live and to enjoy life and go outside and do things and touch grass. And, it's just tough. It's so easy to get focused on just the exam. So that was really important, and to continue to do the things that you love.
Yeah, I've always been really active. I played basketball my whole university career, and since I'm coming to terms with the fact that it's over now. It's been hard to digest. I've been playing since I was 5, and I'm 23, so it's 18 years straight of a basketball season. So that's been kind of weird. Luckily, I still had that while I was studying. But being active is really important to me. It's a good outlet. Listening to music, reading a book that I really like doing that. I would also, even within the studying itself, I would sometimes, if I was just having a day where I was like, if I see a question that I don't understand one bit and I see it multiple times, that's just going to be it for me today. So I would, sort of tailor the things that I was looking at to be things that I knew I was familiar with, and just sort of take it as a day where I was still doing practice questions, but at least I knew I had a high degree of success on most of these questions. Or I was like, okay, I like answering psych questions about this, so I'll check that they can give me questions about that. So I was still meeting the requirement, but almost like psyching myself into enjoying it more. I liked doing the practice questions for the most part, so that part wasn't hard for me to do. And once you start doing it, you kind of lose time a little bit once you start doing your sections. It didn't seem as long. I also was doing it during a time where it was nice weather. I think that helped a lot. If it was the dead of winter, that might have been harder for me because I couldn't get outside and walk around in, negative temperatures where I am. My roommate has dogs, so I always had a dog in the house. So that was, hanging out with the dog for a little bit. And also, if there was a day where it was really just not happening for me, like one day off isn't going to make or break your score. So if you wake up and you're just totally mentally exhausted, your brain is fried, you can't even think about a single thought in your brain, just, give yourself a little bit of grace and take some time off, and just know that that will help you long run in your preparation. Also, not burning out is key over this process. You don't want to you want to sort of ramp up perfectly so that on test day you're feeling prepared and at your best, rather than having studied for too long and you're just completely exhausted and have like resentment towards this whole process.
Yeah, and I'm just going to build a little bit on the I really do think it's important to factor in rest days too. That was something that Trinity mentioned. So I tried to take the weekends off for the most part and not study that much. Maybe I'd look over content, maybe just a little bit, but especially when I was doing content review, I wouldn't like jam pack my weekends full of stuff. I tried to give myself a little bit of a break. And then again, I remember there was like 2 weeks where I did not study and I felt so awful. And I had a little calendar where I was keeping track of all the chapters that I would do. And I just felt so bad about myself for not studying those 2 weeks. And it was like, that was my graduation weekend. I just graduated university and I was going and seeing friends and celebrating and, walking on stage and all that. So, it's important to give yourself grace and to be like, it's okay that I took a break, especially because you are giving yourself a lot of time to study. And if you give yourself those, 3-ish months, I think that really was a sweet spot for me. So, you'll be able to catch up. And, if you're really frustrated and having a difficult day, it's okay to not study that day if you really need to. You don't want it to become too much of a pattern, but just to recognize that on those days, you're probably not going to get that much done regardless, and you're going to be frustrated. It's just, you don't want to bring all that negative, bad feelings into it. So yeah, just be patient with yourself. The next question is, what did your study schedule look like in the beginning when you were taking classes? I think this one's more for Trinity because I was already done with my classes when I started studying.
Yeah, so I had a full course load. So my school semester based. I was taking 5 classes when I started studying. So like I said, I gave myself almost 3 months just to get through content. So I think there's 12 chapters in each of the Kaplan books, or around about there, I think. So again, I ignored some of the chapters, especially if I was presently taking a class on that, I probably wasn't reading the chapter. So I was definitely prioritizing my classes that I was currently getting graded on. I think that's also really important to note, that your MCAT score is one of many factors that they're going to look at in the admission process. So don't sacrifice your MCAT score for doing poorly on those 5 classes. If getting a really good MCAT score wasn't going to balance out getting, C's in that semester because I was too busy looking at the MCAT. So I gave myself lots of time. So I wasn't necessarily studying during that time for the MCAT as much as just looking over the content and just knowing what was going to be on it. And then doing the Anki cards. I was already doing those for my other classes anyway, so it didn't really feel like that much more to just add. It was essentially like taking another class, but without lecture and homework. So I would say probably every day, maybe at like an hour, hour and a half max, most extra per day. Was what I was doing during the week, and it was, as an as needed basis. If I had a week where I was absolutely slammed with assignments, I wasn't looking at the MCAT that week, which is why I gave myself so much time to get through it.
And then it looks like the next question is, how much time should be spent on each question on the actual MCAT? So I had to look this one up because I remember that there's definitely a time limit. So it's actually, what they recommend is about a minute and a half per question. That being said, it's timed exam. You'll have a little timer up at the top of your computer screen that's counting down and telling you exactly how much time you have left. So shooting for about a minute and a half is good. But if you get hung up on a question and it's just not coming to you and you're really struggling, the best thing you can do is flag it, like before a minute's up even. Flag it and move on, because you don't want to get so hung up on a difficult question that you spend 5 minutes on it and then you miss 4 questions at the end because you just didn't have enough time to get to them. So that's something that's been really helpful for the MCAT, is the ability to mark it for later, save it for later, and just keep going and recognize when you're like, this isn't coming to me. This is not going to come to me likely anytime soon. So I'm just going to move on and make sure that, I had a practice exam where I think I missed like 7 questions at the end because I got so distracted by 2 or 3 difficult questions and spent way too much time on them in the beginning. So that's something that's super helpful for not only the MCAT, but that's a strategy for med school exams that I rely on a lot. We have the ability to flag questions and then just move on, because I'm not going to miss answering these questions at the end because for maybe 1 point. So
Yeah. And some of the questions that you're going to see are going to be related. So it'll be like part A, part B almost of the same question. So those will be less. I know that there's some people that like to read through what sort of each passage is and then decide what order they're going to do based on that. If that works for you and it's not taking up too much time and you can still be successful in answering all the questions beforehand during the time limit, then that's great. I always did it in the order that they gave me. The flag tool was really helpful. Again, like there's some questions where I'm like, absolutely, I'm like, I don't even feel like reading this right now. Or some questions are really long worded, and it's like sometimes depending on where you are in the exam, you're just like, I just can't be bothered to read this 5 sentence question right now. So some people like to do that. Most of the questions are passage based, but there's a few in each section that aren't. Some people like to get those out of the way first and just do the basic content ones. What are you? I would just say make sure that you're used to the timing. By the time I was writing, I think the only section on my actual exam where I was still really using the full time and like looking over it was cars. I think that's just kind of the nature of that section. You tend to second guess yourself because you're like, all these answers seem right to me. But on the other sections, I was under the time limit. So it's really just practice and making sure that you can answer all the questions.
Yeah, and I think Trinity, I mentioned it before too, but just if you can read the questions before reading the passage, a lot of times that will save you time in the long run because you'll know this is what I'm really looking for and this is what I'm like, I need to see this in this passage. So it can kind of help you like narrow your vision a little bit, especially when you have to read a passage. So I think with cars and other passage-based things, I tried to give myself, I believe it was 7 minutes per passage, more than like focusing on per question. It was per passage because you have to read it and then also answer the questions. So
Yeah. And there's all the stuff, all the resources have timings on them, so you'll get used to that. Um, oh, I was going to say something else. Oh, the highlight tool was my best friend while taking the MCAT. There's some things that you get used to them asking questions about. Like we said, it's come back with repetition. Like you get used to the style of question that they're going to ask. If someone's name is in a passage, if they're probably, especially in cars, they're probably going to ask you about that person. So I would highlight that. Any date I was highlighting in those passages, if it was like, this was discovered in 1943, I was like, okay, I'll highlight that just so I can have an easy way to go back to it. Highlighting any keywords, especially if you're reading the questions beforehand and you saw a word in the question and then you see it again in the passage, you can highlight that just to make note of it. There's lots of tools available to you within the software, so I would say use those to your advantage.
yeah, and they'll also be on like the practice exams will have the same tools that they'll have on the actual exam. I think it's strike through and highlighting. So yeah, get used to those guys. And then what were your scores? I think I missed this part. Somebody was asking. So I got a 520 and then Trinity got a 519. So we were both I think it was 97th when we took it, right?
Yeah, somewhere. I think it was
Yeah,
97 or 96, one of those.
yeah. So
Yeah.
it's top percentile score. So
Mhm. Yeah.
that's what we're
And
given.
every score you get is a score range also. So I think that one falls into like it's like the 518 to like 522 range. So it's like a confidence band that they give you. Um, yeah, just be happy the score that you get. Like you said, you if you're using your practice resources correctly, you should know basically what you're gonna get on the exam going in. Like my score wasn't a surprise to me. Some people luck out and score a little bit higher. Some people score a few points lower. But again, if it falls within that confidence band, then you're pretty good.
Mhm. Let's see. And then what are other weird rules for the MCAT, such as the no scrunchie rule that we said earlier? So yeah, the no scrunchie definitely kind of surprised me. I had no idea about that. It was actually a girl in the testing center. They took away her scrunchie and she was really worried and somebody gave her a hair tie because out of the goodness of their heart. So it's just they don't want you to be sneaking anything into the exam room. So the no scrunchie, no water bottles are allowed, no personal items at all. Your phone, of course, has to stay in the locker. No, you can't bring in your own pens or pencils. So they'll provide you with like a dry erase, like marker for you to write down notes or write down things that you need to if you need formulas. Um, so yeah, for me, they made me scan my palm, on like a computer, I don't even know, like a computer scanner to scan my palm to confirm my identity in case they had to check that later. You have to show your ID when you're coming in and out, so you want to make sure you have that on hand. They also make you like roll up your sleeves to show that you like haven't written any formulas on, so you'll have to do like a little flip. I don't think you're allowed to, smartwatches are definitely not allowed. I'm trying to think what else. I don't know about belts. I was thinking about it later. If they don't allow scrunchies, they might not allow belts, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I can look it up.
Yeah, I think that was it. I remember like sort of looking at the guy my fifth time coming in and out of the room. I'm like, it's still me. It's like checking my ID again. I'm like, okay. Yeah, your phone gets locked away in this like special bag within your locker that you can't open until you leave. Um, yeah, there's not I remember being surprised that not everyone starts at the exact same time. At least that's how it worked in my testing center. It was staggered. So there were people by the time I got in, I think I was the fifth person in, who were 20 minutes deep into their exam. That comes back to practicing with distractions, because people were getting up and leaving the room at different times, which I wasn't expecting. There's your cubicle is camera recorded by a test monitor, so everything you're doing is recorded. Um, yeah, coming in and out of the room. I had to turn my pockets out. The pants I had pockets, so they had to make sure that I wasn't hiding anything in those. Um, I think that was it. My testing center was on like the third floor of a three-story building. I was allowed to leave the actual room and like walk around the floor. So that's what I did during my breaks. Um, the everything when every time you leave the room, everything except your ID, like all that dry erase board and stuff, will stay at your cubicle. It doesn't come out of the room, or even your cubicle with you. Um, Everyone, they tell you to be there at a certain time. It won't actually start on time. Again, you're staggered. So I think by the time I actually started my exam, it was after 9 a.m. So it was a bit later when I left. And yeah, you can take the time, not take the time. And if you're practicing with certain time breaks, know that the time that your break starts on that test includes the time it takes for you to get in and out of the room. So just know that it's going to actually be a little bit shorter than what you think it is. So if you're, planning on 15 minutes on the dot, it's probably better to aim for about 10 and then not be worried about getting back, because that clock will count down and it's starting whether you're at the cubicle or not.
And I just looked at the rules again, just to remind myself. So again, you can't bring in hats. That's another thing. And then you're not allowed to access your phone on breaks. I don't think we mentioned this beforehand. So yeah, you can't use your phone or just check your messages. You can bring your phone in, but then they put in like a special security bag kind of thing where I don't remember how exactly it works, but like you can't open it. Or you're not allowed to, they'll know or something. So you can't be looking on your phone. Um, yeah, just a lot of weird little rules. They want to make sure that you're not sneaking, anything in. But yeah, it's definitely kind of funny.
I've always said, with how much security there is going in and out of that room, I've always just want to know, like, I'm sure there's someone out there that might have successfully done something. And I just want to know actually like how, because the level of monitoring is insane. So I don't know how you do that. Yeah.
With the scrunchie, I'm
Um,
sure that they busted somebody like
yeah,
like a formula sheet or something.
right. How many days a week were you studying? I was studying 5 or 6 days a week once it got to full time. Madeline was the same, usually taking weekends off, or at least most of the weekend, just for like mental health, not getting burnt out, having fun. You can still have fun while you're studying for the MCAT.
Yeah, I took the day off before the MCAT too. I didn't study at all. I went out, I took a super long hike, like a 12-mile hike, just to kind of poop myself out a bit so that I'd sleep well. So yeah, you don't want to be burned out. Like if you're cramming up until the exam starts, that's just going to be rough on yourself. So you want to give yourself a little bit of a break. Like Trinity was saying, you want to make sure that your mental health is protected and that you're not doing things that are just going to exhaust yourself.
Yeah, I had, because of my hotel stay, I had 2 nights in the hotel. So I had 2 days in like near closer to Toronto than I am now, where I just had nothing to do. So I would go out, find places to like, I think I've killed some times at some thrift stores. It was nice outside, so I spent some time at the park. My grandma lives there, so I met her at the mall and we had lunch and dinner and stuff, and did anything but study for the last. If you don't know it in the last couple of days, you're not going to know it going in. So, um, yeah, I took those last couple of days beforehand just to sort of relax and put myself in a good mindset, and so that I could go into the exam not having studied 7 hours a day before, because then I was probably not going to be motivated to do well.
And then
Some of the, go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of the questions is if they can get a recording of our wonderful presentation. Thank you. Yes, it will be available on YouTube. So we'll have this posted, and then we'll also upload our slides onto the Pre-Med CC website for this event. So they'll be down at the bottom, and then everything will be posted.
Then, did you guys utilize your dry erase board during the exam? Absolutely. I liked the dry erase board. For there is basic math on the physics sections, but I'm not one of those people. I think it was just drilled into me from my first math teacher who I had. Like they're like, when you do a math problem, write out everything. So that's how I solve math problems. So that's what I did during the test. Also, I would write it out. Even if it was something simple, it just gave me more confidence having written it out and realizing that that was the right answer, rather than worry that I had, missed a zero somewhere or done some stupid mental error that was going to cost me a question. I have a habit, same during exams, that I will write down the number of the question that I've missed. So if I didn't know question 17, I would write down 17 and put a star next to it, and then I can sort of cross those out as I go. Yeah, and then any formulas that I knew I was likely to mess up in the moment, I had written them down a couple times, and you don't have to erase it between each section, so they can stay on there, like right from the beginning.
Yeah, I've heard of people like the first thing they do when they get into, because chem and physics are your first section. So I've heard of people that would like write all of the equations down, like memorize a list of all the formulas that they might need, and then just write them all out. If you have time to do that and that's something that you like to do, or that you find helpful, go for it. I did not think it was super helpful because that's a lot of time that you're spending at the beginning that you could be spending on the questions, and you may or may not even need those formulas. So it really does depend on you and what works for you. I did use the erase board just to like write out math problems, like Trinity was saying. That was what was helpful for me. But other than that, I really didn't use it for anything other than the chem and phys section. Yeah, I think I just needed it for the math problems, and I found that really helpful. But sometimes maybe you need to write out some info. Maybe you need to like draw a little mind map or something and how they're connected. Whatever works for you.
Yeah, and I know some people, like, if it could even be helpful if you're a person that tends to fidget a little bit with things around them, like just like, doodling a little bit mindlessly. Like, my grandma has a habit of doing this on the phone. She literally gets a piece of paper out every time someone calls her, and she just draws these random patterns everywhere, like mindlessly without even looking at the page. So if that's something that you like to do, that might be helpful to sort of focus yourself. Yeah, I didn't use it much past the chem phys section, maybe like a couple times on biochem. Writing out formulas and stuff for chemical formulas was maybe helpful a couple times, but yeah, I sort of lucked out with the order of the exam for me. I liked Psych Soc, and I found that out of all the sections that has the most repeatability. I feel like if you've done 8 Psych Soc questions, you've done all of them. Like a lot of the questions are really heavily repeated on. So by the time I got there, I was like, by the time biochem was over, I was chill. I was like, I like Psych Soc, this is fun, and it's just like a bit of a change of pace from the rest of the exam. So yeah. Don't see any more questions coming through. Right. Yeah, like Madeleine said, this will be recorded on YouTube. We also have, if you're in need of it immediately before this gets uploaded, probably within the next day or two, if you delve deep on our YouTube channel, the one from last year is on there somewhere. It's the same presentation. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we also both have like our own individual presentations too on MCAT.
Mhm.
So like if you really want to hear more about Anki, like Trinity's got a whole video lecture
Yeah,
on.
I do.
Yeah, you should get sponsored.
I love Anki, guys. It's great. It's the ugliest software ever made, but it works.
I've tried so hard. I keep trying, but I mean Anki is something that will come up again in medical education. So you'll see it again and again.
Yeah.
If you can make it work for you, like it's definitely a game changer. My
Mhm.
brain can't do it. I don't know
Yeah.
what's wrong. Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming. It was nice to see you, Trinity.
Yeah, you too.
Bye, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.